Hello, I'm Shannon Tiezzi from the Diplomat, and I'm happy to be here today at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where I am joined by Dr. Victor Cha. Dr. Cha is a Senior Advisor for Asia here at CSIS and is also a Professor of Government at Georgetown University. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Dr. Cha is going to be discussing with us the situation on the Korean Peninsula and its impact on regional security in Northeast Asia. To begin, Dr. Cha, I'd like to take us back a little bit to something that happened later last year, in 2013. What was your take on the high-profile charges and execution of Kim Jong-un's uncle, Jang SongThaek? What did you think that really meant was going on behind the scenes?
Well, I think it was a surprise for everyone. All of us who look at North Korea, I don't think anybody would have predicted this sort of outcome, and then the way in which it happened, of course, him being publicly taken out of a party meeting and then being executed. I think there are two interpretations. One is that that Kim Jong-un, the leader, with this effort is consolidating his power and removing all of the people who might be possible competitors, and therefore it's a sign of strength. There are other people who look at this and look at the same set of events and say it's a sign of weakness, because if one has to go to the extent of actually removing the effective deputy in the country from power and in such an unceremonious fashion, it's a sign of desperation, it's a sign of significant churn inside the system, and therefore it's more of a sign of weakness than it is of strength. I tend to believe the latter more than I do the former, because again, this was such a shock for everybody.
There have also been a lot of commentary about Jang's ties to China in particular. Do you think that this purge implied any sort of message about China-DPRK relations, or is that too much of a stretch?
I think at the core, this was about a power, was and is about a power struggle inside of North Korea, whether it's within the party or it's between those loyal to Chang versus those loyal to Kim Jong-un and his group of followers. I think that was the core of it. The fact that Chang was probably the window for China into North Korea, and perhaps the window for other countries into North Korea, probably was an additional liability from the perspective of the new North Korean leadership. But I think what's very clear is that China too was shocked by this, and that the individual that they had relied on so much for connections inside of North Korea, Uncle Chang, if you will, is now gone. And so I think that's quite unsettling for the Chinese as well.
Now, we talk a lot about China being very involved in Pyongyang and one of their only international friends and unofficial allies. But what are China's real interests when it comes to North Korea? What would they like to gain from that relationship?
Well, I think the most important thing for China is stability. North Korea is one of the countries on their border. China historically has always been worried about stability on its border. It's had border disputes with the Soviet Union, with India, with many countries on its periphery. The one country in all of that it actually negotiated a border agreement with, in which it gave up its claims, was North Korea, because I think they believed that was just so important to be an area that was stable for China, it being sort of the pathway for Japan historically to the mainland, and all of that historical baggage. So I think that's certainly one. The other is, more recently, is the economic benefits from North Korea. We don't normally think of North Korea as providing economic benefits, but for the Chinese, in the extractive industries, particularly from about 2009, the Chinese have been signing contracts with different North Korean companies to remove a lot of the minerals and natural resources that are in North Korea. The northern part of the Korean Peninsula is endowed with coal, nickel, iron ore, even some rare earths that don't exist in the southern part of the peninsula. And I think the Chinese see these contracts as a way to provide business and provide some economic well-being to the two inland provinces, Liaoning and Jilin province, which historically have not been very well off provinces, but could do well through these extractive industries. So I think those are both sort of the long-term and the shorter-term interests that China has in this. And of course, the third is that they don't want to see the North Koreans creating problems, whether that's with South Korea or with the United States. They'd rather not see that happen. And they haven't been successful, quite obviously, but they've tried, either through bribery or through food or through unreported aid shipments to try to get the North Koreans to moderate and modulate their behavior. Again, an effort that hasn't been very successful.
So if the Chinese three main interests are stability, the economic interests, and then also kind of keeping North Korea to be a somewhat responsible player, it seems like the execution of Chang could have feasibly threatened one, two, or even all three of those interests. Is there any indication that Beijing is thinking about changing its approach in the wake of those events?
I would agree with you. I think it's threatened all three of those interests. And so the big question is whether China is going to sit back and wait and watch, or whether it's going to double down, if you will, in the sense that I think they have not been very happy with Kim Jong-Un. There's a reason that they have entertained a visit by the South Korean President Park Geun-hye, but have not yet entertained a visit by the North Korean leader, largely because they find this guy's behavior to be quite problematic. But with Chang gone, with their main contact in North Korea gone, China may be forced to double down. It may be forced to embrace this young fellow as a way to try to get a handle on the situation rather than to keep him at arm's length, which is what they've been doing. I think most in the United States and Japan and South Korea would not like to see China do that. But the Chinese may feel like they have no other choice in the matter if stability remains a big priority for them and having some sort of sense on the ground of what's going on there. They've lost all that after the departure of Jang SongThaek.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of economics, China has been kind of nudging North Korea to start implementing economic reforms, opening up to outside investment a little bit more. Do you see that happening in the immediate future, especially with Chang'an?
I don't think so. I mean, I think China has had a long-term strategy of trying to promote economic reform in North Korea from the top down. In my book, I have a chart that shows all the places that the Chinese took Kim Jong-il for the 10 years that he visited China. And it's very clear, they took him to car plants and cell phone manufacturers and fiber optics plants, because that's what they wanted North Korea to do. And so they've been very unsuccessful in that regard. I think the North Koreans are interested in economic interaction with China and with the rest of the world, but not the sort of economic interaction that we think of. I mean, they would like to create, as they have done, a tourism complex in which people pay them money, and then you can go visit the tourism complex, but it's completely gated off from the rest of North Korean society. That's the sort of economic interaction they're interested in, not one that actually leads to an opening of the system or allows benefits to flow more broadly to the entire population as opposed to the leadership.
And when we talk about North Korea, obviously most Americans immediately think of the nuclear issue. And we had an update on that recently from the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, who informed Congress that the U.S. does believe North Korea is continuing to expand its nuclear programs. How do you think that this news is going to impact the security situation in Northeast Asia?
Well, it's certainly not good news. I'm quite concerned that North Korea is well on the way to developing a deliverable nuclear weapons capability on a ballistic missile as far as the United States. I mean, I think this is something we have to realistically be concerned about now. They've already demonstrated for the first time an ability to put a payload vehicle into orbit, which is a very important step for them. And the next step is to obviously weaponize a warhead and be able to have it re-enter the atmosphere and target whatever it's targeting. These are major technological thresholds for North Korea, but if there's anything we've learned about the history of their program, they're not afraid to try. And I think Director Clapper's comments underline that fact, that if the U.S. national security establishment is concerned and expressing concerns about the expansion of North Korea's nuclear missile programs, then it's a real threat. And unfortunately, the diplomacy has not gotten us anywhere at this point, and the sanctions by China have not really been strong enough to curtail the program.
And we had the U.S. representative, Glenn Davies, who deals with North Korea, went to China and also South Korea and Japan to discuss these issues. Do you think that there's any sort of red line in terms of either actions taken by North Korea or technological thresholds reached that could sort of meld cooperation in the region to the point where China and the U.S. would now be on the same page?
You know, I think we always hoped that that would be the case when North Korea did its first nuclear test. And I think for a period of time there was a real melding of the minds when it came to North Korea. But the problem is that that eventually evaporates for whatever reason, in part because, you know, China still sees stability as being the main thing that it wants on the peninsula. And so initially, after some terrible North Korean act, there is sort of close cooperation, you know, in supporting UN Security Council resolutions or in supporting sanctions. That's there. But eventually, on the Chinese side, it starts to fall away, and it gets replaced by a constant call for the United States to go back to the negotiations and talk to the North Koreans and try to find a solution. The core problem is that when we think about a solution is that for the U.S. and for other parties involved in the six-party talks, the idea has always been trading economic and political benefits for an end to their nuclear weapons program. The problem under the current leadership in North Korea is that they've enunciated something called the Pyongyang strategy, which says that they pursue nuclear weapons and economic development together. And if that's their strategy, then the diplomacy by definition is not going to work. And so that's sort of the problem we currently face, even if we were able to get back to the negotiation table.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Obviously, a complex subject that we will all be paying close attention to. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Cha.
My pleasure.
And thank you for viewing. Once again, I'm Shannon Tiezzi with The Diplomat.